Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to another Ronan Nazarene Talks. I'm introducing this one because Ronan asked me to, because he doesn't want to introduce it because he's confused what the subject is, I think.
Exactly. I'm a simple man. I can't take these big concepts.
Well, with Chris Mohan on again. This time we can hope you can hear his voice and hope to hear the dialogue, because last time we did a spectacularly bad job with the audio. It was almost proud.
Yeah, you're breaking with the concept that it was all on purpose and that it was somehow going to be my new persona, a bit like David Bowie, reinvents himself every couple of years.
It was recorded in the depths of hell.
Yeah. So hopefully this one you can actually hear. But then maybe we'll just turn the visuals off soon and just let you get confused. So the idea of this one is we're going to talk about films that were made before 1960, because 1960 was kind of the break point where you kind of went from the first kind of stage of Hollywood, which was the silent film and the talkies and the war period in the 50s, which was a certain generation or two of films that all the films felt they were from that kind of same mindset. Then from 1960s onward, there's almost a new generation come in. It was kind of the hippies come in, and everything kind of changed the attitude. It was more cynical. It was more just different attitudes. People like Kubrick come in, Frankenheimer, more modern directors, and the attitude was much more like working class, and it was much more like a democratic view of film before it was more of a studio-bound system. So we're taking the studio-bound system as a subject before all these changes happened. So that's the idea. And because we three, I think, like those kind of films, the older films as well, I thought it'd be quite good if we could talk about that era. Yes. Because I think we can come up with some interesting stuff about it. So it's so for you young folk like Isaac and SGS Films, or SGS Arts, SGS Arts now.
Yes.
You could learn something if you listen to us, especially you, Isaac.
Fair enough. You got to a manifesto.
Yeah. I was told to insult the youngsters before we started. So.
Good job done. Good stuff.
Yes.
So what's everyone's kind of experience of watching films from the kind of golden era of Hollywood and before, and the silent era of Hollywood? What was your kind of introduction to those kind of films?
I think it was generally matinees on afternoon television, especially if you weren't allowed to stay up later. Then obviously classic Hollywood films would always be on in the afternoon, so you get exposed to the classics first, the kind of It's a Wonderful Life and that kind of thing. And then as far as silence weren't really on the television that much. I think I only got into silence a little bit later when you can discover them for yourself on VHS, if you remember VHS. And again, that started off as the classics like Metropolis and other films like that. And then again, obviously, we broaden horizons. But I think it starts with afternoon matinees and the kind of the classics, the screwball comedies and things like that.
Yeah, you, Chris?
It's interesting because, when you're obviously at a young age as we were, and obviously access to media was kind of curated for you by those matinees or by TV. I don't think you ever considered them as classics. They were just kind of old folky films, that you never knew actually anybody that watched them at the time, because certainly my grandparents weren't cinephiles or anything like that. They never talked about going to the cinema or anything like that. And silent films the silent films that I would have seen around the time would have been very much the caperish stuff, the kind of running around chasing people. And very comedies. Yeah, indeed. And maybe a bit of Charlie Chaplin or something like that. So it wasn't until I would say, the advent of the boutique Blu-ray where you really started to look at silent cinema in its own kind of right and say, right, there are definite directors and people that drove this entire movement to be something more than just that comedy caper, while still enjoying all the comedy caper.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some silent films, mainly comedies, during like Sunday morning shows and stuff like that, in between Tarzan movies and Champion the Wonder Horse.
Yeah.
You know, I saw stuff like that, so I knew them. But I mean, in VHS, they were releasing stuff like Nosferatu and a lot of the really famous ones, I would say. And you get some films shown like late night TV, like Sunrise or something. I saw Sunrise in video, but they were hard to get hold of, though, the silent stuff. While the talkies were easier, because you get a lot of Cary Grant films, you get a lot of Hitchcock films. They'd always be shown on TV. You get a lot of like 40s suspense movies. Like, I've got an affection for like women in distress movies from the 40s because there's so many of them. They were always getting shown on TV in the afternoon and things, and you'd watch so many of them with a woman always thinking her husband's going to kill her. You know, pretty much suspicion rip-offs and, you know, gaslighting
stuff.
Stuff like that. But also the rip-offs of those films.
Yeah.
The cheesy ones you'd never hear about again. I'm sure I've seen quite a few of those that I've no idea what the title was, but I'm sure I know them pretty well in my subconscious somewhere.
Yeah, don't worry, Indicator will be releasing them at some point.
Yeah.
But it's also, you know, seeing Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd.
Yeah.
I remember them at 6 o'clock at night a lot. And then obviously the other thing is Westerns. Westerns would always be on in the afternoons and Saturdays and Sundays as well.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot of really bad Westerns from that time period, but there's also some absolute gems as well, obviously.
Yeah, that's the one memory I have probably. Now, maybe more towards the 1950s, etc., to get the Technicolor, etc. But when I went into my granny's house, as soon as you open the door, you just got the pew pew just ringing all around the house. You know, they were always watching a Western of some sort.
Yeah.
And even with Westerns, it kind of took me a while to actually discern what's a good Western and what's a bad Western and who are the people actually behind them. You know, because obviously it used to be there was hundreds of Westerns made every year, probably.
Yeah. It's sort of like superhero films now, or superhero TV shows. It's like there's so many of them, you have no idea. You only really notice the good ones, and the bad ones just kind of fall away.
Yeah, and obviously it wasn't until later where I actually put like a name to who was in charge of the films, because obviously when you're younger you just watch films and you don't have any idea who made them or how they're made or whatever.
Yeah, but they used to actually start putting on films like Anthony Mann seasons on TV and stuff like that. You start to get an idea of who they were, and Bud Botticher and Andrew Toth and stuff like that. You might not see all the films, but you'd see some of them and be like, that's distinctive, that's different. I mean, you always hear about John Ford, but I never really get into John Ford. I never could really get into his stuff. There was an odd one that Fort Patch I really liked, or The Searchers, but most of the time it felt from a different generation. And that's the big thing with the older films, is some of them felt really modern, like Howard Hawks films. And other ones just felt like they were from a stuffy generation that you couldn't get behind.
There's a real traditionalist Western, and then there's the kind of postmodern Western.
Yeah, but I suppose it's like any kind of films where, you know, you watch certain films in a genre, you kind of, I suppose, initially don't really think about, you know, who's directing it, who's acting it. Maybe the acting comes first. You know, I like John Wayne in movies. I'll watch another John Wayne movie, and then when you kind of total it up and you kind of look at it afterwards, you see similarities between some of the films that you did like, you know, and that's where the director or the filmmaker comes out of it and says, well, it turns out that most of those are all Howard Hawks films, for instance, or something like that. And you go, right, then you have to see what the style and what the things that jump out, what makes a Howard Hawks film or otherwise, you know, and that's the bit where it becomes, I think, interesting at that point.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really know, but you know certain styles you like. You know Hitchcock stuff, even though you don't know Hitchcock stuff.
Yeah. You
know them. And then you realise you've seen other films by other directors, but you didn't know you're watching them. You're just watching them because they're on TV. Like, I think I saw a few Fritz Lang films and didn't know it was Fritz Lang when I was younger, just because they were on TV. And it was like, oh, I remember that one. When you start watching it, you're thinking, you think you've never seen it before, and you realise, with 10 minutes in, I've seen this film before. I don't know where, but I have seen it. So
there's no doubt, like, if I go back to Silence, bouncing about here, but back to Silence, like, you look at Fritz Lang, you look at someone like F.W. Murnau, you look at Dreyer, they have all very different different ways of approaching silent film, even though the amount of choices that they had were limited, maybe with the fact there was no color, there was no sound. But they each had their own very distinctive way that they approached making films, and all for the better.
Yeah, because some of the silent guys are more plot driven, whereas other guys are just more expressionist and more the power of the image. Because again, silent, you could argue, is the closest to pure cinema because it is just images.
Yeah.
And certainly for me, I prefer the silent cinema that's more expressionistic rather than kind of plot heavy or plot driven.
Yeah, because some silent films, it didn't really matter they were silent because they found ways to tell you stuff without having tons of intertitles.
Yeah.
And other ones, it was like, there was so many of them, you're thinking, I'm reading more than watching a film. It's just they haven't figured out the visual language to make it interesting. But you don't really get that in something like Fritz Lang movies because he's so good at showing you the image to show you what's going on. And every so often you have to stop and give you an intertitle here or there, but it's really not in most of his films. It's about the visuals and there's weird shots and
it must have been so brilliant back in those days because anything from anywhere in the world could travel. All you needed to do was change the titles every now and again. There was nothing to stop, somebody making a film in Germany and it being shown in America with a modicum of modification. Whereas, of course, as soon as the talkies started, that kind of fell apart,
Yes. It's the fact they were able to do these great films while they were essentially experimenting and playing with the form as well. Because you can tell, like the early talkies, they didn't quite know how to do stuff, and it's the same with the silence. They were still playing about with it and how to do it, but they still managed to make some of these great films as well.
Yeah, if you actually look at some of the early talkies, they had different acts for different languages. Like Testament Dr. Abusive, you actually get the Criterion version, you have 2 different languages, so the different takes and different lengths of some takes for different languages that were in the film. So there's 2 different versions, and they managed to restore it through different language versions of it when they thought it was lost. And you look at the original Dracula, you had the Spanish language version with different actors. And I think that's a much better version than the Lugosi version. It's more interesting. And it's like, that was going on a lot because they're trying to work out what to do with talkies, but because it's like, oh my God, people talk. And some directors, it didn't faze them at all. I was like, oh, this is cool. Not directors that were absolutely stuck. Maybe look at 20th Century, which is just out Indicator. It was made really early in the talkies era. Yeah. And it's visually really interesting because Hawks knew exactly what he was doing. And he knew like a close-up of John Barrymore hamming it up was worth so much, Yeah. And other directors were just like had meanderings of yapping and further yapping. You're like, oh, please go on with it.
Yeah, because the early days of the talkies, a lot of it was kind of transferred from theatre. So they had lots of kind of theatre actors in films that probably shouldn't be in films because they were theatre actors. It was more stage bound. There wasn't camera movement. It was pretty much the camera would just stand and people would just cross because that's what it was in the theatre. So it wasn't until a little bit later they actually figured out we can move the camera and actors became less kind of theatrical, if you know what I mean.
Some of that was due to the sound equipment. Like it was so heavy to start with that they couldn't move it. But then you have someone like Howard Hawks, who, even though that was a problem, he figured out how to use the visuals anyway, because he could say, okay, we're stuck in a set. How do we use it interesting? Arnold Lubitsch the same, because they were not scared of language. They were like, this could be an advantage if we have good dialogue. While other directors that weren't good at that were really stuck.
Yes, I mean, a perfect example is Holiday, which the Criterion release has the earlier film version, which again was pretty much transferred just from the theatre version. So it's theatre actors who aren't very good on screen. And then a few years later, it was Cooker doing it with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, and it's completely transformed into an absolutely amazing film. And better than the Philadelphia Story, which was the year later for me.
It's funny because it's... Yeah, I know. I was going to say the same thing, but that's okay. They're both very good films. But it was that kind of Liam McCurry kind of taking then the dialogue, etc., up another notch. And I think that kind of screwball comedy that then came out of that era, I think is much more akin to something you'll see on TV today, where the jokes are so quick, they hit so often that you can sometimes get overwhelmed the first time you watch one of those films and like, whoa, slow down there a second, my brain can't process. Whereas I think that happens a lot on TV today as well.
Yeah, the first time you see his Girl Friday, it's just like so fast. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, but the thing is, some of the still that actually came from silent. We are looking at what Buster Keaton was doing, the pacing he was doing with silent movies. He wasn't doing it as a slow-paced movie. You look at Seven Chances or Sherlock Jr., those are fast-paced movies with lots of scenarios. Even though you can't hear what they're saying, you know what they're saying, even though you just need a dialogue. But it's still that kind of fast-paced feel. So even silent movies didn't need to go slow-paced if you had the right person behind them who could deliver something just visually to mime it.
Yeah, and they played with tempo and pace of film as well. In a lot of those films, like a lot of the classic sounds would speed up the footage to give it that impetus and to give it that kind of drive and that feeling of energy.
Well, I told a friend we were doing this about silent film and up to the 60s. He said, "Are you going to do the whole thing in mime?"
We're not that
experiment.
Yeah.
I think we're past the experimental stage.
Yeah,
we did that last time.
That was the last time. Yeah.
So what would be, if you had to pick a silent film for somebody to jump on with, where would you start? Where would you start somebody? Something that maybe isn't that comedy caper, or maybe a really good example of a comedy caper?
So would it be a silent movie that would be just to get people into it?
Yeah, so something I think that somebody will watch, or you'll force somebody to watch at least initially, and about halfway through they'll realize this is actually incredible and not what I thought maybe silent cinema was, in the populist sense.
Well, the thing is, I showed my niece and nephew a Buster Keaton short, which was actually one of his longer shots. It was like 20, 30 minutes, and there was quite a lot in it. Didn't matter to them as silent. They were laughing their heads off at it. They just was like, "Oh, this is amazing." So it didn't really matter to them because they got the visual language of it in a way it wasn't stiff to them or anything.
I thought it was the same with Tara Lloyd, actually. We'd watched Speedy, or she came in one day and watched Speedy, and there was only about 10 minutes in, and she just sat and watched the rest of it, and was like, that was really, really good fun. Because, as you say, there's just a language of humor and that you can identify with, and this kind of sort of silly character that Tara Lloyd always played. It was likable, but, Yeah.
I mean, I would probably say Metropolis, just to get people started, because, again, people sometimes have the view of silence as being very stiff and very stuffy. But I mean, Metropolis production design is just as spectacular, or more spectacular than films today with CGI. It's a story that you can still relate to today, and it is kind of narrative driven. Because I suppose if you started people in more expressionist stuff, they might get turned off. Whereas I think Metropolis, people would still be hooked into that just by the look of it, because it still looks amazing. I
think if you spend the first hour of that film just going, when was this made? There's just no way, because certainly I would say for a lot of periods between the 30s, 40s, 50s, etc., you never seen anything as bombastic as that, to that scale either, so that Lang did that was something else.
I mean, that might disappoint people once they've seen that and then they see other silent films, but I mean...
Yeah, I was going to go Fritz Lang as well, but since you went Fritz Lang, I'll go for Buster Keaton. I'll go for Our Hospitality, which is a more obscure one, but it deals with race, and it deals with him going back to a town and trying to kill him. He's trying to stay inside the house. It's a very good visual metaphor, and it's a great chase at the end. And like, that'll just tell you everything you need to know about the language of silent films. And you can do something complicated with it while keeping it simple. And just a great example of there's a simple story, but it's also complicated, and it should do the layers you can do without language at all, because it's visual language throughout.
I mean, that's why Eureka is so good, because they're still releasing these, because silent films shouldn't be forgotten about, and they shouldn't be archived, and they shouldn't be, they don't really, they're too dated and they're not relevant anymore. I mean, Eureka are just doing a great job. Obviously, they're coming out of the hands of Orlac, which is absolutely fantastic.
So what's your choice, Chris?
Well, I have to say the first one that changed my mind was Sunrise. You know, away from the
Yes.
comedy, because I'd been watching probably quite a lot of Keaton at that stage, etc. And then I finally get round to Sunrise to watch. But I'll pick actually because Sunrise can still, as everyone says, there that expressionistic kind of view will either hit or not. I think for people, you know, you know, just like a slower, you know, film will hit or not. I'll go for The Man Who Laughs, because I think it's a film that's just short of 2 hours long. That when I went, oh, a silent movie that's sort of an adventure film, but it's never going to keep it up for 2 hours. And then the film ended, and you know, there is a lot of obviously very visual stuff with the Conrad Veidt's facial kind of makeup that he gets to do, but then the storyline that goes on there, I think a lot of people will identify with, and I would imagine if in isolation you hadn't set it up as being a silent film, I'm not sure whether people will remember it 2 weeks later as being a silent film, because it definitely has a lot of action and a lot of, you know, very strong storylines. It's very easy to follow, for instance, you know. So The Man Who Laughs, I think, would be my call.
That's a great choice. It absolutely blew me away the first time I saw it.
Yeah.
I've not seen it yet. I've got it behind me. I've not. It's on my backlog.
Oh.
That is sacrilege.
I know it's no, but I've got the Paul Linney stuff. I've watched Waxwork, so I'm actually working my way through them just now. Just haven't got to that one yet.
And the last
I was waiting for his other one to come out, and then I was going to go through them all because I've been setting up my projector as well. So I thought I'd wait until it was all done and then watch the projector.
I'll make a great video. The 4 of them in a row.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm biased towards Conrad Veidt, but The Man Who Laughs is just sensational.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I mean, obviously, if you want to go mad with people, you show them Caligari. If they really want to go,
it's a bit slow though. I was thinking
it's a bit, but it's trans-like, so that's kind of half of the point. And it's like
but again,
that influence is still today. You still see Caligari in films today.
The production design in Caligari just is amazing. The buildings of the sets, there's just some bits of that I just sit back and go, wow, the ideas that are on film here are just not just pointing a camera at somebody and shooting, you know, making them scary and going, you know.
Yeah, like Fritz Lang one, they didn't direct Caligari, but he was involved in it. Is Dr. Mabuse. It's a really fast-paced film. It's 4 hours long, and he does not feel 4 hours long. And Dean look into the same thing. It's like it's so long, and you think this should be, you know.
Yeah, still haven't watched the Nibelungen.
No, I started.
You dare say sacrilege to me.
But I would argue, in my defense and in Runa's defense here, the Nibelungen is not fast-paced, whereas Mabuse, once you start it, it is quite easy to finish because of, again, very strong drive through it about what happens. I'd say the Nibelungen kind of prances about. Sorry for the fairy reference. But
no, I love the Nibelungen. I've heard no words against it.
But it is
the second one. The second half is brutal as hell.
It is interesting that silent movies weren't afraid of long run times. Let's just say, you know, it wasn't that they had a code that says because there's no words or because it can only do so much, we should keep this under an hour and a half. That seems to be what the common theme of modern Hollywood is. You know, if it's over 90 minutes, you're playing with fire.
Yeah. Well, they don't do it very well. That's the problem. It's 2 hours long and it feels it should be 30 minutes, which is the problem.
Happens every now and again.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's so many silent films that are just so epic that you really want to see more. Even some of the weirder ones that maybe don't work as well. I mean, if you look at something like The Woman in the Moon, the Fritz Lang one, it's kind of silly in a lot of ways, but it's also wonderful imagery as well. It's like this weird kind of mix of this world that doesn't really work anymore for the modern audience, but it's still wonderful because you're seeing the way they saw the world, like 1920s Germany. It's got some wonderful visuals.
I love how Lang just took on projects that just seemed to be outside the scope of what they should be doing. You know, there was like a real view of wanting to try something or kind of, you know, put on a show for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was taking ridiculous chances that other people weren't, but
and torturing actors at the same time.
Yeah. And of course, it's the best time if you want to start looking at silent film, just because there's so much available on really good prints and restorations.
Yeah, I mean, you look at many of the Murnau stuff. It's the Faust. You know,
Faust's amazing. That blew
yeah.
me away. That was another one that blew me away.
Yeah.
The first 15 minutes of Faust is just redonkulous.
Yeah.
And even something like The Passion of Joan of Arc is pretty much just facial expressions for the most part of that entire movie.
That's wonderful, though.
Like I like that as a concept. If somebody sold it to somebody to say, "I'm going to make this film, it's going to be this.
Yeah.
We're not going to show any of the action. We're just going to show," and you think, "God, this will never be a thing."
Yeah.
And there it is.
It's right beside me.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I'm
Sure,
sure it's right beside me. Yeah. I didn't really mean it to be. It's just it was like, that's right my knee. That film he's talking about.
That's fairly random.
I know it is. It's weird. I was moving stuff around.
And you didn't even bring it up. It was me.
I know. It was just weird. I had it there because I was moving stuff around and I just put it there to move later else
You have
somewhere
a
else.
hidden time
But I
machine
wasn't
somewhere.
actually thinking about this at all. It was just like, I'll do that later. I was like,
Yeah.
that's my knee.
No, I am just looking around you to see what else I can see sitting around. If we can link it to it. But yeah, that is a film that in essence should fall apart. But again, just the amount of drama that a filmmaker can capture just from a decision, I suppose.
Plus, they used 20 frames a second as well then, which... so they just said a gift from Zoom. We've removed 40-minute time limit to your group meeting.
Thank you, Zoom. Zoom God.
Appreciate
Is he
it.
Greek?
Yes. So, so yeah, now the 20 frame a second thing is amazing. It's like, why do they not do more like that now? Because it looks so naturalistic and interesting. And we're 24 frames a second. Like, you should do more of that. And can you see them doing that now in stuff like Fury Road, where they do different frame rates and things, just to mess with you a little bit and just change your perspective. And they were doing that in the 1920.
Yeah, I always think that's interesting because we obviously would have done that with music a lot. You know, when things get popular, that have kept a very similar tempo for popular music, and then somebody will come along and say, "Yeah, that's interesting, but let's do popular song in a different time frame." And all of a sudden, it hits, and then everybody copies that. And that, I would say, that's pretty much what happened in Hollywood for about the next 40 years. Is somebody hitting a formula, it became very successful, and Hollywood being Hollywood without maybe the outside influence after about 1935 or so of Europe or otherwise, just kind of did the same thing for these 5-6 year chunks.
Yeah. I mean, you can lead up. I mean, you put the silent era, then you have the lead up to the war, even where they brought a lot of German people in, did a lot of horror movies and gangster movies and stuff. Then they kind of went to the war movies, the patriotism movies. Then afterwards, it was the film noirs and the musicals were big. So it was like two extremes. It was either musicals or really depressing films that everyone would love.
Yep. Then in the 60s and 70s, Italy would do 800 of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But in the 50s, you had the kind of more musicals and less noir, and it was kind of, and you did biblical epics, and they were a bit stiffer. And it was almost like the end of that kind of era that was hitting the wall, basically, where a lot of the directors were getting older and they couldn't really innovate anymore, and they were just trying their best to do something.
Which is why we are saved by world cinema around that period, I think, in some ways, you know.
Yeah,
the 50s and late 40s for world cinema just took off.
That's one of the real pleasures I think about going through this now, is that with every release of something from the mid to late 40s to 50s of world cinema, you just realize what an absolute treasure trove there is to find and see.
Yeah, because Japan started opening up in the 50s after Rashomon, which obviously we're all down that rabbit hole and have been for years. And obviously Bergman started becoming famous in Saijit Ray in India and Germany and Italy and the new era and France. It's just exploded.
I'd say late 30s, early 40s was very much the France period. The directors from that period, the names are just that they were all about at the same time, just kind of is incredible. Like that kind of Renoir, Becker. Yeah, it's just as Clouseau was coming in, you know, it's just unbelievable the standard of film that they were churning out on a regular basis.
You look at Noel as well in Mexico at the time. He was doing amazing stuff in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
When no one was paying attention to him, then you look at all the films he was making, it was like, this is great. El. Alexander de la Cruz and all that stuff, and it was like, wow, he was doing this and everyone's forgetting about him. He was doing all these amazing films in Mexico.
And of course, the great thing that they didn't have to worry about was the Hays Code. So they didn't have a Hays Code in Europe and other countries. So
it's funny. I was thinking about the Hays Code last night, actually, when I was kind of popping ideas. That one of the things that really turned me off Hollywood movies, or even though the Hays Code ended in the late 60s, is that the remnants of it still were there.
I think there's still a Hays Code today, but
the fact that the bad guy very rarely ever wins, in movies, I think set movies back for years, because in many cases the last 15-20 minutes of a movie was pointless to watch. The resolution was mapped out long before you got the last 15-20 minutes. You knew how it was going to resolve, so therefore you took the drama away from what should have been the crescendo. Whereas that obviously didn't have to happen in the rest of the world,
Yeah, occasionally you get Nicholas Ray doing things like Bigger Than Life and making it so ridiculously upbeat at the end that it just became like perverse. So there was really good directors who managed to subvert it slightly at the end, but like you say, the general stuff was...
Fritz Lang, even in America, he had some really dark endings. It was like, are you trying to make people suicidal in these endings? So I don't know how you get away with some of those endings he had even in America. It was like nuts.
But it is a great point. The likes of Ray, don't mix the two up. Ray took all his drama and moved it 20 minutes previously. So nearly the end of the film was 15-20 minutes before the end. And then the saccharine part was lanked on the top. But it was almost like a melancholy in most of Ray's movies. If I think of something like In a Lonely Place, where the drama is just so strong the whole way through. And then the end just feels like it's a release, but it's a sad release, how that ends up.
Yeah, or in Dangerous Ground, which was kind of butchered and chopped up, but it's still amazing.
If you look at the tradition of Hollywood movies, the Hays Code, that was kind of thing it did in Orson Welles, because Orson Welles just couldn't do that. You look at Lady from Shanghai, it's all about cynicism, and the lead characters are fully false for all the wrong stuff. Touch of Evil is about the villain, basically. He may die, but basically it's about the villain, not the hero. And he's doing stuff like Macbeth, which is about a tragic hero. And it's completely against what Hollywood is doing. And it's no wonder they didn't want him, because it was like, where's the happy ending? Where's the...
why not change the ending of a film?
Yeah. Macbeth should win, right? Macbeth should take the crown, right? We got the crown. Why is he moaning?
But the other thing that struck me about it was that, and this was lost as it appeared, I think the Hays Code created this state where you had to have really strong female characters written in to create the drama before the end, so that they became that femme fatale. So Barbara Stanwyck, I don't know, would have had anywhere near as strong a career if it wasn't for the Hays Code, because of her ability to be, the antagonist or otherwise throughout the rest of the film. Rather than just kind of be a dolly bird, or the kind of thing that was happening around that stage.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think everything, like, sometimes you get all the freedoms, but you become lazy with them. Sometimes you're restricted to find ways around it.
Yeah.
And so it just always goes different ways, because we do have a lot of freedom now. But it's certainly good. It's going back towards the Hays Code, though, because people are more restrictive. It's like, you can't offend anybody, and...
Has to be a good moral center, a good strong message that comes from this. There should be no rampant nudity for no good reason and all that kind of stuff, But I'm sure
Paul Verhoeven's had real problems recently.
Yeah, that's why I think the Hays Code still kind of exists. They just don't call it that.
Yeah.
The Mary Whitehouse Brigade come out and say this still is not acceptable, and certainly around the 80s and 90s when say Verhoeven was doing what Verhoeven was doing, which exploitative or cult cinema definitely took the calling card and ran with that there and said, these are supposed to be fun, they're supposed to be playful, these are forms of entertainment.
Yeah. Well, you did video nasty as well at that time.
Yeah. But it's like anything else, the talented people will find out and work out ways to get around restrictions and
but you look at
things.
You look at where horror went from the 1920s, which they had a lot of kind of darkness underneath the silent era. But as soon as you hit the 30s and 40s, horror was much more sensitive. It's like a lot of films are banned in Britain because they're too dark, or Karl Love movies and stuff that we look at them now and go, really? What?
Yeah.
Why do they put this? And it's like, by the time they were really sensitive towards all sorts of things that we're not anymore. So they had a code pretty quickly, cut down on all this stuff and make it safer. But you look at something like the original Frankenstein compared to like one of the latest sequels about Whale, it's much more primal and much more. It's still getting under your skin a lot more. And way like some of the Son of Frankenstein just doesn't do because it's got this good code of conduct to it. So it's a fun movie, but it's really safe and silly, and there's not really much there.
But that horror genre that was in the early 30s, etc., I think is really important for cinema in general, because they were able to do it in both ends. They could be large and bombastic, but they also could do horror in this really small budget with two sets and throw Karloff in the middle of it, throw Lugosi in the middle of it, and all of a sudden it was just a horror movie by virtue of them being there.
We look at Black Cat with it was toned down so much because it was so far over the top. It's still insane.
Again, it's another example of why, because again, people might say, well, I don't watch black and white films, I don't watch old films, why should I? But when you mention, archetypes like Dracula and Frankenstein and the Wolfman, the first ones that people name are the ones from the 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, you might get some Hammer ones. I mean, if you see Van Helsing, it's Peter Cushing, it's not the guy from the 30s. If you see Dracula, it's like Christopher Lee and Lugosi, the other two that's in people's heads. But the Wolfman's long to change ginger still. I mean, he's still the Wolfman, really.
Yeah, Frankenstein's not Hammer, it's
universal. Yeah, I think Dracula's more Hammer, though, because Dracula made more Hammer. Hammer made more Dracula films, I mean.
But then when I think vampires, I think Vampire and Nosferatu. Rather than Lugosi, anyway.
But those are enduring stories that will be retold maybe in another. You'll be seeing, Christopher Nolan's going to do a Dracula trilogy, possibly coming up, and then all of a sudden that'll be the definitive Dracula films that come around that time. That's it. But those kind of films really strike me as being, weird insofar as if I was to tell my wife we're going to watch a horror movie from the 1930s, she will instantly go, I don't like horror movies. Whereas horror in the 1930s is not a horror that we would speak of. It's barely even thrilling in some ways, but you can still appreciate the craft and appreciate that as a fun movie rather than necessarily a scary movie.
Yeah, I mean, even the kind of smaller ones, there's so many. I mean, even back there, you might see I've got the box set of the Universal Monsters, plus the individual box sets of all the sequels with them as well. Yeah. And it's really sad. And I still need to get the Mummy one. I'm
not going to bother with the Mummy one.
Yeah, no, but I've got the rest of them though. And I want to get Abigail and still meet some Mummy. Come on, I'm classy. But it's that thing is like they're fun. I mean, I adore the horror, the House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein. They're cheesy as hell, but they're really enjoyable. It's like there's something they discovered the wonderful silliness of that kind of setup.
But that's a great point, because they were very serious actually to start off with it, but then the same directors, the same studios, etc., bought into it and thought, right, we're going to run this into the ground, and rather than try and keep on being serious, let's play on the fun of these and let's make films that riff off this rather than necessarily follow the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think they get rid of the top level directors, the original directors, they moved on, and then the next layer come in, and those are the directors who made like Sherlock Holmes movies as well as these ones. And you can see the same sets in Sherlock Holmes movies at times as you see in that Frankenstein movie, and there's like the same backlot. Right. You see certain actors come back like Basil Rathbones and different sort of gothic movies as well as detective movies. So it's the same old kind of thing. They've always kind of floated. But that's very comforting. The same way you can see people pop up in like a Tarzan movie. They may have been a other kind of movie, and it's like, I love all this stuff, and it's just so silly, but it is wonderful, and it is a genuine part of the era. there's also these other movies made at the same time, like the James Cagney movies, in a totally different space, which is very different from what gangster films we get now, but they're fun in their own way. They're different, They're just they're not about the violence, they're about the personality of the gangsters.
Yeah. There's menace in those movies, I would say, rather than necessarily evil. It's very much that these were tough guys, or they were out to make money in most cases, and that was their motivation pretty much all of those films. So it was about trying to enforce their will.
Yeah, but the filmmakers also treated the audience with a bit more intelligence. They didn't have to show everything. Granted, they couldn't show people being riddled with bullets, but if somebody walks into a room where somebody else is and you see a shadow of somebody firing a gun, you know what's happened. Whereas nowadays we kind of have to see the bullets hit the flesh and stuff.
That's right.
Whereas in those days they didn't really have to.
Yeah, but it's funny because it's almost like, well, why do you need to do it after the 80s? Because after De Palma made Scarface, it's almost a parody of that type of genre. It's almost like it was a perfect example of the genre, but also a parody of the genre at the same time. It's like there's nowhere else to go here, really. Yeah. When you go into the Megadeth thing, it's been like it is that thing. It's almost like Bride of Frankenstein. It's an example of the genre, but it's also a parody of the genre at the same time. And it's like, well, you don't need to go any further than this. This is perfect for what it is.
Yeah, because one of the tropes of modern cinema is if you don't actually see somebody die, then chances are they're going to come back in the last 20 minutes. Whereas in the olden days, when people died off screen, they died off screen because you didn't have to show it or you weren't allowed to show it. Whereas now it's just, if you don't see them physically take their last breath, they're going to come back. Yeah,
or in Fast and Furious movies, if they die on screen, they're still coming back twice.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
And it's glorious.
I commend you in trying to unfit in Fast and Furious into a pre-1960s.
The thing is, it wouldn't set me up by saying that. I'm thinking, okay, I can take this further. I can go further than this one. I can. I could have gone with Sam Raimi and Evil Dead. If they're dead, they can still come back. But I thought, let's go full on.
That deserves the first stamp.
You mean the first Fast and Furious film wasn't made in 1937?
But the original was made in the 50s. The Roger Corman one. If you want to go there.
Is that 50s or early 60s? 50s?
I don't care. We're saying 50s. Shut up.
All right, fair enough. 59 and a half.
Yeah, but there's like if you look at something like The Big Sleep, it's all dialogue, but there is a menace to it because the characters mean what they say. There is a kind of sense that things go wrong. A lot of 40s thrillers and noirs, you get a sense of things going wrong. You didn't need to have lots of gunfire. It's like the actual threat was to that person's ability to survive, and it could be intimate rather than blowing half the world up. And that had more impact, really, because you're like, I like this person, and they're probably going to die. That's brilliant.
My favourite film noirs and what I love about film noir is fatalism, where the lead character knows it's not going to end, still goes through with it, accepts that it's not going to end well. And the films don't end well. I mean, Bill My Gallows High, or Out of the Past, as it now seems to be called. I absolutely love that because Robert Mitchum's character knows he's doomed, but does it anyway. And I just love doomed characters.
That's so unlike you.
And the fatalism, I just absolutely love in film noir. Fatalism is fantastic.
Yeah. He says fatalism's fantastic with glee.
Oh, that's like, well, it's much better than faux romanticism when everything works out.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen.
It's funny because I would say noir is one of the genres that you'll find it hard to find anybody that doesn't like noir. It appeals to crime fans, it appeals to thriller fans, it feels it was like a good story, and they were in many cases beautifully made as well.
Just
there's a dark romance to it as well. So even like women like it as well because of a dark romanticism to it, even though it's going to end badly. And honestly, a lot of the noirs have the better women parts.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
They really did. They gave the actresses stuff to do, and it was like much more fun for them to do it.
Yeah, I would recommend Women on the Run and Too Late for Tears, both in Arrow Academy. They're both amazing.
And I'm on the anything with Gloria Graham train. One of my all-time favorite actors.
Or Elizabeth Scott. It's fantastic.
Should I interest you all in Son of Dracula? which is an early Robert Siodmak film. This is the thing.
Yeah.
It's Siodmak's one of his early. This is one of his kind of exploitation films before he made his noir period. But it's such a noir film, even though the plot's ridiculous. Everything's shot like a noir film, even though it's about Dracula. And it's like, it's so weird. It's a wonderful film. It's very, very, very flawed. But it's obviously he didn't care about the plot. He's just going to make a noir film out of Dracula, and it was like wonderfully insane.
Yeah.
And you get that stuff a lot in the 40s because of the studio production. But sometimes the director didn't care about the subject was given, so he just made it what he wanted to make it because no one's really going to care because it'd been in cinemas for like 2 weeks and it'd be gone forever. So he's like, so I'm going to do what I want to do.
Because again, you can go back and say, well, the golden age of Hollywood, what would it be if it wasn't for immigrants?
Yeah.
Would it be that golden?
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Because the amount of talent that came in is just jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
Even if they changed their names,
Yeah.
So they didn't appear to be immigrants. Because
And it was a constant flow as well.
Yeah.
It was not just like one group. It was like constantly throughout the years, there was more and more and more. It was like, who's interested in this year? We'll bring them in. Who's interested in this year? We'll bring them in. And we'll just keep going.
It's terrible we've got this far and I haven't even brought up Billy Wilder. I mean, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I wish I placed bets how long it would take you.
I know.
Because I was actually thinking the same thing. It's like, no one's brought up Billy Wilder yet.
I know, Billy Wilder's amazing.
We'll go for Billy Wilder then. That's such a. I mean,
he practically owned the 50s.
You've wedged him into the conversation here, so let's run with
it.
Well, I get the Fast and Furious then, so he can get Billy Wilder.
Yeah.
To be fair, this Billy Wilder's kind of relevant.
So is Vin
it's all
Diesel.
about making it relevant.
So is Vin Diesel. Touché.
No, he looks like a guy who should be an extra in a 50s horror movie. Come on.
Yes, Plan
He
B.
looks like Rondo Hatton.
You could remake Plan B United Outer Space with Vin Diesel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a strong pitch. That's a very strong pitch.
As Vampire, obviously.
Yeah. On you go, Billy Wilder, on you go. Have fun.
Well, Billy Wilder's pretty much owned the 50s a lot more than Hitchcock did, in my opinion, in Hollywood, and did several masterpieces. Again, not a nice person to go on with, apparently, but doesn't really matter because he's a master. So,
I mean, I think it's fair to say that not all Wilder's films were amazing, but
not all of them,
but he did so many that.
Yeah,
I was gonna say he did so many of them. That actually the amount that are good versus the amount that aren't very good is actually a very strong ratio.
Yeah. But he's, I think, an example of somebody, the times changed and perhaps he didn't change completely with them. Because some of the films, like the one he did with Dean Martin, is really quite misogynistic and kind of nasty, which doesn't kind of work as well as these other ones. So I think as he got older, perhaps he didn't kind of evolve the way some other people did.
Was that the one that started with Peter Sellers and then he quit and all hell broke loose?
No, it's I can't even remember the title. That's disgraceful.
Oh dear.
Kiss Me Stupid. Kiss Me Stupid.
All right.
It's pretty much the only one of the few that isn't on Blu-ray.
Right. I mean, it'll not be long.
Yeah, Dean Martin pretty much plays Dean Martin. And he comes to this small town and takes a fancy to somebody's wife, and it's just kind of.
Yeah, that is the same one. I think it was about to start. Peter Sellers. Was it
was supposed
Walston,
to start Peter Sellers. Yeah, quite possibly.
Yeah, because he was meant to play that part, and it all went to hell.
Because Kim Novak, maybe.
Yeah. We were thinking the same film.
Yeah.
I've seen that one, so shut it.
Somebody from Eureka's just watched this podcast 3 years down the line and went,
possible.
challenge accepted, not in Blu-ray, Billy Wilder film.
Yes.
You know, we'll get it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not his best.
And then have you look at have you read Karen Crowe book with Wilder on that film? Apparently, it was a real disaster behind the scenes, and it was just like
you can kind of tell.
I do find it interesting that recently, you know, a lot of people talk about film noir, the real classics obviously being things like The Big Sleep, or, you know, the real things that are standing out. But Double Indemnity seems to have made its way further and further up the conversation as every year has passed, as being the definitive film noir or otherwise. And I mean, it's obviously magnificent, but
yeah. And Laura, which is a little bit different.
Yeah, Laura's really good. I really like that one.
Yeah. Twisted.
Trevor McGurr was a really good director. It's kind of forgotten now.
Yeah.
I mean, Not to Be a Murder's an amazing film. It's
That's an
really
incredible
good.
film.
Yeah. And again, no one talks about it as much anymore. And it's like, why not? It's really, really good
it's
film.
brilliant. I mean, I often say James Stewart is one of the most bankable people in absolutely anything. You know, he turned every film that he walked in or starred in into something that was definitely worth your time. You know, I can't think of a bad Jimmy Stewart film. I honestly can't.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
It's just
What's
not
a Jimmy Stewart film you wouldn't actually watch?
Yeah. I recently got 3G Air Command, the one he did when they did Anthony Man. Look at that one. I haven't watched it yet. I will watch it though.
Maybe that's the one.
That is pretty good. It's like, well, he produced it because he was in he was doing that as during the war, so obviously it was personal to him. Plus, him and Anthony Mann, how can you really go wrong?
That's true.
Yeah. Destry Rides Again is fantastic.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
With Marlena.
Yeah, so much going on in that film.
Yeah.
It's almost Blazing Saddles before Blazing Saddles.
Yeah. I'd like to point out how many good cartoons there were, because I was including even cartoons as well as the 5 action films. Because there's so much great stuff, especially the Looney Tunes. I mean, Disney gets a lot of praise, and there's a lot of really good Disney live action, Disney feature length films like Dumbo and Tokyo and Snow White. But some of the shots that Looney Tunes did in the 30s, 40s, 50s were absolutely stunning, perfect form. You know, 5 or 6 minutes of utter genius. You know, that don't get the respect they probably should get just for a look at a form that was really hard to do, and some people perfected it.
Yeah, and ages incredibly well.
Yeah.
You know, I think some more modern animation doesn't so much as well, but that hand drawn, fun animation definitely will never go out of being popular or relevant. You know,
it's so unsentimental as well. It's pretty brutal. I mean, Daffy Duck is hammered so many times, and Wile E. Coyote, it's just like there is no sentiment at all. And there's so many levels of humor in those films. Some of them verbal, some of them are just slapstick, and it's the way that they're all paced are really amazing.
Yeah.
You know? And I think I kind of gets overlooked because they were the things that were always before the films, before they were shown in cinema. They were the things that were always started them. And it was like people kind of forget that. It's like this was all over the place in that time. And it was such a high quality.
But you're right, Dan. Animation. I was kind of thinking about that last night, and I knew I would forget it. You're absolutely right that you know, the birth of, you know, the empire that is now Disney would not be Disney if it wasn't for the strength of those early films. You know.
Yeah.
Doing something like Fantasia.
Yeah.
And coming up with that. Oh yeah, we'll do Fantasia. It's like what? It's like that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I was watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit last night, so that's why I remembered.
There you go. Fast and Furious and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I mean, I bow down to your.
Well, it's set in the 40s, though. I mean, as more.
You may as well mention Cool World then, because that's set in the 50s.
I mean, Cool World's awful.
Still mention it. Can't remember the last time I saw it though. But
I mean, by inference, you're saying that Who Framed Roger Rabbit deserves to be held up with Double Indemnity or The Big Sleep or something like that. But yeah,
I don't say anything. I just had to watch it last night.
Put no qualitative measure on it.
Oh dear,
I haven't seen that for years either.
Yeah. We haven't mentioned Preston Sturges.
No.
His verbal, I mean, some of the verbal stuff he did in his films was stunning. Him, Lubitsch, there's so many in Hawks, there's so many great. We touched on it earlier, but I mean, there's so many great verbal directors who could just let the actors really deliver some amazing dialogue, and just you could actually just sit and let the camera sit still and just watch the actors play off each other in interesting ways.
Lubitsch is amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, Preston Sturges is almost interesting for his life outside his career as well, because it's such a weird life he had too. But I mean, some of his peaks, like Lady Eve and things like that, were amazing. Sullivan's Travels. I mean, there's just like non-stop bits of genius throughout because he knew what he was doing.
And we've already did a podcast on Lubitsch, some of his amazing films, like To Be or Not to Be.
We've started it.
We did one.
Yeah. We've got that box set still to do.
Yes.
And no one's never seen enough Lubitsch. There's always more to find, more to see. But yeah,
this Eight Wife's a nice one.
Given that Ronan didn't get to mention Billy Wilder, and since we're stretching it out to 1960, you get to talk about Sagittarius Ray then as well, or I should have said.
Yeah, again, arguably the most underappreciated world cinema master in the world. Certainly the way his films have been treated or not treated. Granted, you know, Criterion does have a fair number in Blu-ray, but certainly not enough. And in general, his films just aren't very.
I've got one recommendation for the most underrated director.
Mizoguchi.
Yeah.
Is Mizoguchi underrated?
I was going to say, he's one of the three masters.
No, Kurosawa and Ozu get a lot more press than Mitsubishi does.
Is he not the third master? I'm pretty sure it goes
Kurosawa. So it's Ray's like the Indian master in a lot of places. Yeah. So, I mean...
if you want to go there, I'd go Kobayashi, though. You know,
when you go then?
You know,
is this turned into top trumps?
It has. Yeah. No, the difference with Kobayashi obviously is he didn't make anywhere near the amount of films that Mizoguchi did. You know, but I mean, talking about a hit rate for great films from one director, it's frankly ridiculous. What Kobayashi did.
I would say Mizoguchi's films aren't as available as the other ones, which needs to be addressed. You're certainly right about that.
I do think with a lot of Mizoguchi films that are famed, a lot of them are very dour as well. You know, Life of O'Hara is a pretty tough watch.
It's miserable and wonderful.
it's one of those things. These things are beautifully shot and beautifully made, but
Sancho Deo is brutal.
And Ugetsu isn't exactly, they're not exactly right. I'll sit down with a nice cup of tea, a nice Richard or Mr. Kipling bun, a Rudyard Kipling bun, a Mr. Kipling bun, and we'll watch a bit of Ugetsu, But magnificent.
I know someone haven't brought up yet that seems like a really bad omission. Renoir.
Yeah, Chris mentioned him briefly, but we didn't
mention it briefly. I mean, in the video that I'm taking forever to make, Le Grand Delusion is the first part of the cinema season because there's no other place to really start. So I could do the entire video here, but I've scripted and wrote it a million times. But what's interesting about Le Grand Delusion, I think specifically, is that it's a war movie about World War I in the midst of the birth of World War II, but that hardly a bullet's fired in. You know, it is not a film about war, the active war. It's about the relationships within war, which, again, for a film in 1936, which should have been about spectacle, should have been about all those things, it is just incredible piece of filmmaking to concentrate on all these things. And typical great films, the themes that are in there are still as relevant today.
Yeah.
You know, the relationships of relationships between different people of different backgrounds. And Stanley's is just absolutely mind-blowing how he conceived that and both filmed it, you know.
And the fact he got abuse from everybody. It's like all sides didn't like it.
Yeah, that means you've succeeded. We all hate it.
Until I got to Roosevelt. He was the one that basically says, I just think this is magnificent. But my favorite part about Le Grand Delusion is the kind of life cycle of how it came into being, in that the Nazis confiscated it. The Russians found it, took it home with them, and then donated it back to the French in 1960. Otherwise, the relationships in the film kind of mirror an awful lot of the relationship of how we got to see the film nowadays. And I think that's just kind of amazing in its own right, and life imitating art in some way.
And the extras in that Studio Canal release are really excellent.
They really are good, aren't they? I think I speak about this now and again. I think Studio Canal as a label kind of got this reputation of being a bit lesser than, but I would say especially the World Cinema not talk about George Streeter's The Vanishing, which has not an extra on it,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
the rest of them are really quite considered and really well thought through of what it needs. But yeah, I
and
think
the
that's a
stuff
good
that
list.
Jeanette Van Sandu does on the French releases is excellent.
Amazing. I again, that label, Renoir, Clouseau,
Some Becker as well.
and the Becker in there as well. Just there's not a bad film to be had in those releases. They are all amazing.
Yeah, it's another one of those labels you could easily spend 300 quid on without trying.
Yeah. I just love it. Yeah, Renoir, The Rules of the Game, etc. I keep on eyeing up the old DVD box set that's flying around too, with all of the other 1930s output of Renoirs as well to dive into. But
I've got that one, the Swamp one, when I did about the swamp. I can't remember the name. Swamp Water.
right.
Yeah, I've
Have you
got
watched
that.
it?
I haven't watched it yet.
I know. These are the problems we all have.
Yeah. Our director, I would say, is really good and underrated is Alexander McKendrick. Did Lady Killers. He had so many good. He did all the really, really, really great alien films.
Sweet Smell of Success.
Yeah, and they went to do that as well. It was like to go from Alien to do that.
I watched Lady Killers last weekend, and I think honestly, the first half an hour of that film, the filmmaking and the ideas in it just make it one of the greatest films it ever made. I think it doesn't keep it up for the entire length of the film, but the shadows looming in the windows and the reflections in the mirror, it's just the mind that put that together is just something to behold.
Yeah, there's so many films. One in the White Suit is stunningly good.
Yeah, I prefer that one to Lady Killers.
Yeah, I do as well. And we've got stuff like Mandy and the Maggie and things are all really strong films. I mean, he was doing one. It's a real shame his career never really took off. He had to go to America, and then he didn't really fit in there because it was like it was one of those directors that sort of like Michael Pilway was very British in a way, but very outside in another way because he'd look inside and see the flaws and things, and you just wish you got a bit more of him, really.
Yeah, Sweet Smell of Success is just so savage and so bitter. It's like I'm not sure how people would have thought he would suddenly go in to have a big career in America after that.
Yeah,
because it was just Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis, just to these literally cookies full of arsenic.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there obviously Michael Paul and Emmerich Pressburger as well. Like, the legacy that they've left behind is something else as well.
Yeah, they're mid to late 40s to early 50s. It's just unparalleled.
Yeah.
I mean, I often talk about sitting down to watch The Red Shoes for the first time and thinking, well, I'll humor the wife by watching The Red Shoes here with its subject material and otherwise, and then getting to the end and just lifting the top of my head off and setting it down beside me to just think and contemplate about how an incredible piece of filmmaking that was,
It's like ballet. Do I really want to watch a film
it's
ballet?
It's not even about ballet, it's about the backstage ballet, and about the characters in there. There's
really
nothing in that
like...
if I read the synopsis I went, oh, let's go watch that, but it easily sits in the conversation of one of the greatest films ever made,
Yeah, I adore Tales of Hoffman, even though it's not as good as Red Shoes. I still
flawed,
adore
but there's moments of absolute genius.
Yeah.
I even watched, and I know this falls outside the 1960s, but I've been watching some of the Children's Film Foundation stuff. The Children's Film Foundation release that they made, but The Boy in the Yellow.
The Boy Turned Yellow.
Boy Turned Yellow, that's exactly it. And
it's a fun little film.
It's ridiculous, but kind of amazing,
Yeah,
it's the fact they didn't just have like one of the greatest films. They've got like 5 of them at least.
Black Narcissus, Matter of Life and Death. I mean, it's just incredible. Yeah,
but again,
Canterbury Tale.
Yeah, never appreciated really in their time. And when you consider what they were doing compared to what other British filmmakers were doing at the time, it's just like as if they landed from a different planet. Yeah,
their films had a look and a feeling that other people weren't doing. They definitely do stand alone. And there's a reason they are revered, should I say? That it's not by accident.
It's probably the best thing Scorsese's ever done is actually championing Michael Powell.
I mean, that's a hell of a statement as well.
Martin Scorsese's done a lot.
I mean, I like Scorsese, but I mean, the last 20 years, his restoration work's the most important thing he's done, rather than actually his films.
That's kind of where I was going with that. The man who championed world cinema as much as I do agree. I think as great as Scorsese's filmography is, I think the things that need to go down in history for are the preservation and restoration of a lot of those films, because those were really important at that time.
Yeah.
And
there is a chance without him, a lot of them would have been lost.
Absolutely, yeah. Very important filmmaker for reasons other than making great films.
Yeah.
Not to take away from the fact that he made great films.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, is there anyone else we really should have mentioned though? Because it's like, that's something we've been listening a lot.
There will be.
And you're thinking there must be something really embarrassing we've missed. Something that's like.
Well, there's a couple I can think of. Let's go. Frank Capra. We mentioned George Cukor very briefly. You know, Leo McCurry had said recently.
Has Frank Capra lost a little bit of his luster, do you think, over time? Just with a little bit of sentimentality, same way John Ford maybe.
I mean, there's definitely a point in there. I mean, if you made It's a Wonderful Life, you're never going to totally disappear.
No.
You know, it's one of those things. But again, I think James Stewart gets the ultimate kudos for It's a Wonderful Life rather than Frank Capra. But you know, it happened one night. That's Capra as well. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a template film, really.
Yeah, it is indeed. You know, follow along that you could watch that in any age, and it'd be fun to watch. But you're right. There's not as much Frank Capra standing the test of time. I think that maybe would have been.
I think
about
20 years ago, 30 years ago, he would have probably, well, maybe not been in the top 10, but certainly probably top 20, maybe. Whereas now you just don't hear him in those terms anymore.
I'm trying to think. Pocket Full of Miracles, I think, was his as well, which was the later 1960s was one as well, and it's not great. So I think, you know, if
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yeah. People make
Can't Take It With You, which I might actually be my second favourite one behind It's a Wonderful Life, my favourite suicide film of all time.
but there you go. Like, It's a Wonderful Life wasn't the bee's knees in 1946 or whatever year that was, you know. Yeah. I keep on going to watch Best 8 Years of Our Lives as well, but I never make it through the end of that.
And I do think Leo McCarey has come up in people's regards, whereas 30 years ago he wasn't really talked about, whereas he's kind of went up in people's estimation.
Yeah, I mean, it's up and down, really.
Yeah, Make Way for Tomorrow is just like.
Because I put something else, and then, well, he just sort of straddles the thing. Douglas Sirk is the other one that I have a great fondness for. Yeah. I mean, it does kind of boggle my mind that not more of his stuff is not available on Blu-ray for us to see. Like, I'm trying to find a good print or a decent release of Imitation of Life, which is 1960, but you know,
I've got 2 Kino Lorber Blu-rays of Sirk that I've still to watch.
Yeah, but there's Max Orphos as well, who's also underrated. Yeah. He's done some great stuff, but it's harder to find his stuff as well.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to buy stuff now, like Rondi and stuff like that, but it's hard to get hold of it. You get some labels doing some of them, but it's not everything.
Yeah.
I mean, let alone we don't think it's even a Blu-ray of that one. You think that's the most famous film?
Yeah.
Other people didn't mention. Okay, I've had to Google it because we're
have you Googled other people we haven't mentioned?
Yes, I have. That's pretty much. That we didn't mention. I didn't really talk about Ozu. We did mention him briefly with Kurosawa.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, that's how talking about Ozu. You shut him up. Just shut him up. It's all right. So he's one of my. He's in my top 5 directors.
Yeah, so I haven't seen enough. I've got ones in my backlog, but the 2 that I've seen are masterpieces. So.
Yeah. See, Ronan loves Kurosawa and I love Ozu, so this is a big difference.
It's possible to like both.
I know you can. You're always going to prefer one.
Well, like I said, like the 2 that I've seen are masterpieces. I just haven't seen the rest, so it's
all I'm saying is, compared to Ozu, Kurosawa's a hack. That's all I'm saying.
They're very different filmmakers. I think that's very fair to say.
Kurosawa did a much more wider range.
Yeah, but not as good.
The thing I'll say about Ozzy is I could understand if somebody said to me, I don't like Ozzy films.
Yeah.
Because they are all of a certain nature. They're all wonderful and beautiful. Well, everyone that I've seen. But I could appreciate that somebody would just fall asleep in the middle of them.
Yeah.
Well, plus, I've said from an outsider, the kind of subject matter that Ozu touches on, it doesn't resonate with me as much.
Yeah.
So
that sense of family, and
it's all about preference and things like that.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Plus, I'm just being a pain by what I'm saying.
Yeah, I might watch the rest of Ozu and rate him higher than Kurosawa. You never know.
Yeah.
The next one on the list that we forgot about to mention, I did think about him earlier on. He's actually is one of my favorite filmmakers, Elia Kazan.
I haven't seen that much of him though. That's the thing. He's one of the directors that he has to have fallen away.
Well, Facing the Crowd is great. You know, obviously On the Waterfront is great. My favorite is actually Tree Grows in Brooklyn of his. I absolutely adore that film. It broke me in bits, I have to say. Any film that breaks me in bits emotionally, you know, just gets a place in a list for me somewhere.
Yeah.
But I've still got Wild River and Boomerang to watch. They're in the backlog.
Yeah, Boomerang's good. I've seen Boomerang. Boomerang's very good.
I've got one. He did one about a pandemic as well in the 50s, Richard Widmark.
Panic in the Streets.
Yeah, I've got that one. I haven't watched it yet though. That was good though.
Yeah, Jack Palance.
Yeah.
Next on the list, Robert Aldrich. Yes, yeah.
So you said Jack Palance. It was like
I know Attack is one of my favorite underrated
Big Knife.
Classics. Big Knife.
Yeah.
Rod Steiger with another subtle performance.
Yeah, you've got the Mike Hammer film.
Yeah.
I remember the name of it now. I know it usually, and it's suddenly
Kiss Me Deadly.
Yeah.
Oh, Kiss Me Deadly.
Yeah.
I'm indifferent on Kiss Me Deadly. I've got to be honest. I know a lot of people love Kiss Me Deadly, but it's so atypical, I think, of noirs that.
Yeah, it's a strange film.
I maybe it was one of those ones I went in with an expectation of it being this thing, and it turned out to be that thing. And I had my cup of tea and my Mr. Kipling bun.
Yeah. And things, I was lucky. I saw it without any expectations because I saw it like a movie drone or something. I had no idea what I was going to see. And it was like, it was amazing because I just had no expectations.
But there's some director called Federico Fellini. I mean,
Hack.
Again, I haven't seen enough, so I can't really comment.
I have to say, of the pre-1960s stuff, the only thing that I've really seen is I forgot the bloody name of it. The one where she's in the circus with Anthony Quinn.
Strata.
Strata, yeah, indeed. Which is just wonderful. I just love the Strata.
Yeah, but he's more of a 60s director, though.
I would say that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was going to mention Pasolini, and then I realised he didn't actually start until 61.
I
always thought he started in the mid-50s.
Because when Kubrick started before the 60s, but he really became a massive director in the 60s.
Pass of Glories is a great 50s film.
You could throw Joseph Mankiewicz in there as well, but again, had a couple of early hits, and then of course. You did mention it very briefly, the Italian neo-realism, people like Vittorio De Sica and people like that, those misery films.
Rossellini.
Is that what I like to call them? Yeah. Rossellini as well, yeah.
So you say misery, Rossellini?
Yeah.
There's just no happiness anywhere there at all, but,
really... If you mentioned misery, Ronan will know everything about it.
There you
go. And William Wyler. There you go.
Yeah.
There's the last one I'll throw out. That we missed.
John Bram is an interesting little filmmaker.
I was wondering you were going to get there.
The Undying Monster. He did the wonderful Laird Krieger films, The Lodger, which is the best Jack the Ripper film in my opinion, and Hanover Square with Laird Krieger as well. Interesting, really short little films, but economical and atmospheric and wonderful.
There is one fact we haven't mentioned at all that we should have been on the tip of our tongues forever. We have not mentioned him. Ed Wood Jr.
Oh, that one.
Ed Wood Jr., of course.
Yeah. We have to mention the worst director of all time because he came to the 50s.
Well, we never.
See,
we
I
actually
would
didn't.
say he's not the worst director of all time. There's far worse than
I
Edward.
know, but it was notoriously the worst
He
director.
got
but,
labelled, yes.
yeah, but just the thing is, you had to bring him up because he was a product of the 50s. He was a product of the lead up to the 50s and all that time. He wasn't talented, but there was something weird about his films, and they were unique
he
to
was
the
trying.
50s.
He did try. He just
I just thought it would be good. Since I mentioned all these great directors, it would be good to mention him as.
Well, if it wasn't for Edward, Tim Burton wouldn't have his best film.
That's 100% true. Yeah, indeed. But but didn't really
What's
talk
that
about
going to do with Batman
Hitchcock.
Returns?
Yeah. You make an interesting point, but a wrong one.
Yeah.
Carol Reed.
Yep.
Of course, The Third Man.
Third Man, odd one out. There it'll go. And Hitchcock, like I say, would kind of skated over Hitchcock. I don't know.
I think that's a worthy thing for Hitchcock to be skated over.
Everybody else talks about him with such length that.
Yeah, the things I'm more a Fritz Lang guy. Ultimately, I like
I mean,
Fritz
to
Lang more
me,
than
I know
Hitchcock.
people think I hate Hitchcock. I don't hate Hitchcock. I
You
just
just loathe him.
I just think he's a solid technician, and that's where I rate him really.
He made some great movies, but as far as a filmmaker, I think his stuff actually becomes less interesting than maybe some of his other contemporaries. I think, given that he did kind of a lot of the same kind of plot devices, etc., going from one place to another one.
Yeah, but he did peak in the 50s anyway. After Psycho, he was over pretty much.
Yeah,
really.
But again, if you compare him with like Franjow, who did Les Yeux Sans Visage, which is a flat masterpiece, Le Diabolique. Clouseau did Le Diabolique 5 years earlier, which Hitchcock was really jealous of.
Wages of Fear is supreme suspense
Hitchcock
movie.
Doesn't compare to
Le Corbeau. I mean, Clouseau is without being, he's the director that I think Hitchcock wishes he could have been, or a storyteller that he wishes he could be.
Murderer Lives at 21.
21, yeah,
it's just amazing.
I mean, the output from Clouseau is just mind blowing. I think that the one man could have done that many great suspenseful thrillers. Or
I think you're right. Hitchcock is, Clouseau's the director Hitchcock really wanted to be.
Except he just wasn't
good enough.
American. Well, he wasn't. It wasn't. If it had been the sound there and people that had been able to see Clouseau's films, universally, quite as thing, I think his luster would have been much bigger.
Yeah.
And then Charlie Chaplin. I think that's the last one that I could see when I flick through the list. And
I need to rewatch Chaplin, but I've always preferred kind of other people to him. But
I'm more of a Keaton guy, really.
Yeah,
it's an interesting one for me because I think Keaton is the real genius. Although that's loosely speaking because they're both geniuses. But if I look at Keaton now, again, he's another filmmaker I look at and go, "How?" Like. That just seems impossible, especially for the time period. Whereas Chaplin's genius is in other areas. I think of turning that character storytelling is maybe a bit stronger than Keaton, and that Keaton was much more about the physical stunts and the wowing of the audience, etc. And you getting sitting there thinking, how did he do that?
No, I think a lot of Keaton's stuff had really good construction. I think it's underrated. Like some of his early stuff is really, really good. I just find Chaplin too sentimental, and I always feel like he should come on, get on with it a bit more. And
but then that's probably why he's arguably the most popular one.
I know it's just like a Chaplin never did much for me, really. Keaton did, so that's I have a preference for Keaton.
Yeah, exactly. I always had a soft spot for Harold Lloyd. But...
Yeah, Harold Lloyd's magnificent as well. Like I said earlier, one thing I'd say, like obviously, Great Dictator came out in 1940. That stood up well. Sometimes you get a marker laid down in the ground, and
that's
just the way that goes. But
again, Lubitsch's To Be or Not to Be, when he made that, was pretty amazing as well.
Yeah, there's always a few that really kind of are ballsy once in a while that just stand out as something unique. So yeah, I think we've found out that there's so much worthwhile films to come pre-1960 that people do not think about that you really should be looking into.
Yeah. Any films from let's say a lesser known director that you think people should find out? Because obviously people can go down a road of, say, John Ford or Hard Hawks or any of the people I've mentioned. I'm gonna throw one out because he doesn't really fall in that great character or great thing, and that is Now Voyager with Betty Davis. I think it, for me, is one of the best films I have ever seen in terms
Still
of.
to pick that up.
Oh, it is honestly one of the greatest films ever made, in my opinion, by Irving Rapper. As it did it, but I think you should definitely check that out with Claude Rains.
I walked for a zombie.
Yeah, Jack Tourney. How you mentioned?
Jack Tourney. Yeah,
based on Val Luton just films, and you've also got the
apart from Out of the Past, obviously, but
what's that?
Apart from Out of the Past, which we mentioned earlier, but
yeah, but we've also got Night of the Demon as well.
Yeah,
50s.
That's awesome.
And the Cat People, and
just. But my favourite is I Walked for a Zombie. So
which I have to find.
Yeah, that's the one that's not really available.
I got it in American import. It's really good. It's really.
That's one of those.
It's flawed, but it's really good.
All the best films are.
Yeah.
So
Ronan, your one?
Yeah, can't believe I forgot Jack Tourney. I'm not sure. I just think there's a rabbit hole you can go down with film noir, but there's so many little gems that it's a rabbit hole well worth going down.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say, really, because there's so many little gems from directors that you're not familiar with. Obviously not to pound the indicator table, but they've now got 3 volumes of Columbia Noir. Kino Lorber have volumes of Columbia Noir. Then there are just little gems, and like I mentioned, Too Late for Tears and Women in the Run and Arrow Academy are spectacular little films that I'd never heard of.
And like I say, anything an indicator pre-1960 is automatically worth checking out because they don't come along very often. Especially if the full said that noir kind of thing. So they made me a Fugitive, etc. A pretty good watch.
Little film. Yeah. No Orchids for Miss Blandish. That is one of the strangest and most wonderful films I've seen for a long time.
Yeah.
I need to watch more film noirs. I've got a lot of them. I bought them, but I just need to get into them. It's just that thing. So sometimes you're in the mood for certain films, other times you're not, and it's just.
I mean, I get kind of back to the code. There is a lot of film noirs that you think, oh, this is excellent, and then of course the last third happens. Whereas it is just finding those gems that the last third, the payoff is still there. It hasn't been kind of muted or changed.
Which is why it's easy to talk about Nicholas Ray. I think if you were just to pick a director that kind of subverted that kind of final third or the final quarter, I think he jumps out at me as well.
There's also The Killer. So see the Mac film that's really good is Burt Lancaster is going to die no matter what. He's dying.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. But this is one of the problems. This is why you must absolutely buy and pick up everything just in case you miss something.
Yes, this video is sponsored by every single boutique label.
Yeah. But see, when you buy everything and you really regret it and you're homeless, blame Ronan. It's not our fault. It's Ronan's fault.
I'm pretty sure you made this call. I'm just going to...
Yeah. It's also my idea.
Yeah, it's your idea.
I'm blaming Ronan.
So basically watch every film made from 1910 to 1959. There's maybe only like 25 of them. So just buy every one of them.
There's only 20 bad ones. That's pretty much what we're saying here,
Yeah.
Can't miss. Didn't do Napoleon by Abel Gantz or anything, but that's maybe going too far back. I've never actually watched it, so hard for me to recommend.
Yeah, still in the backlog.
Yeah. Yep.
So
there's certain films in the backlog that I'll get to eventually, but I'm.
So I know it's a stupid question, but would you say that you prefer Silent to 1959 or 1960 to 2021? That is a stupid question.
It is a stupid question, but I can give a good answer to it, and that is yes, I do prefer the earlier back stuff, mainly because I've seen less of it and I know less of the stories that are around the filmmakers. I always think there's way more to delve into and way more interest that comes from that than say the amount of films from 1960 on that are considered great films that I have seen is actually a much bigger hit ratio, you know, from that.
Yeah, I'm kind of, I think because I'm a massive fan of the silent era, I do have a preference for that. But there's so many good films since then as well.
Yeah, of course.
But it's just that I have a nostalgia thing for that. Plus, there's so many films I really adore from the silent era. That's kind of, but the era after that, the talkie era from like 30s to 50s, there's a lot less great films for me there compared to some of the later films after that. But still some amazing films even in that range. So it's like it's hard to say because there's so many films in every era you love. But
like you said before, you know, the 50s in broad terms for world cinema was just like an explosion of just talent.
I'll never get to the bottom of that, of even that decade of world cinema. Every time, like we were saying earlier, watching the Apu trilogy for the first time is nearly a religious experience. I think you know when you go through that, and you know you can pick your favorite out of that as they go. You know, people call Pather Panchali their favorite, but I think they're just all magnificent. They each have their own little color to them. If that makes sense.
I mean, we've barely even touched on Dreyer. We've only touched on Passion of the Ark, and so many great films from the 40s and 50s came from him, and he was just astonishing. There's so many directors of that.
Vampire is one of the iconic vampire films.
Gertrude is a stunning end to career, and there's so many films that he made that were just amazing that took years to be seen, but they're now in a good BFI package that's easy to find, and you've no excuse to not buy it.
That's right, and there's usually a good price there as well. You know,
yep.
Still have to rewatch them, really.
Yeah, they're just amazing. So that's my little thing. The Dreyer set. So everyone have recommend one thing. I'm recommending Dreyer set. Recommend one thing for people to try.
This is hard.
It's like
I can't even look at my shelves; they're not even behind me. The Dreyer set is pretty spectacular.
It's easy to be smug when you've already made a suggestion.
I know.
Oh, the Bergman box, and just watch the ones from the 50s and the 40s. Just stop after 1959 until we do the second part of this.
I'm gonna steal the prompt from Ronan. Actually, I'm pretty sure the Five Tall Tales set that you can't get anymore were all 1950s films as well. So, but Baedeker's Five Tall Tales,
like 59.
Yeah, 59. Yeah, so let's go for that because we didn't really get into the westerns that much, but I think they're really good fun. And one of the reasons that they're so good is because they're about that 50 to 60 minute length for the most part. Oh, the other one I thought of, yes, it's just recently released, the Carla for Columbia set.
Yeah, that was so good.
I really enjoyed that. Ironically, the only film that I don't really like is the last one, which is the kind of piss-takey.
I haven't watched those ones yet. I've got them. I haven't watched them.
I like the first four are just so good. I was amazed at how good they were.
I'm amazed Ronan is struggling because he showed us what I thought he would have said before we started this video.
What, the Carol Lombard sets?
You go on about her so much. I thought you were going to go straight there.
I mean, as a Carol Lombard fan, we are living in great times because we do actually get a lot of her stuff, the limited stuff she did, is now on Blu-ray, and Kino Lorber now have released the second Carol Lombard collection on Blu-ray, which is 3 films. So that's another 6 we've got. So I'm going to do a video on one of them. So.
Cool. Oh, just one of them?
Just one of them. People would get bored if I did every single Carol Lombard film.
It'll be exciting to see which one.
I might actually do a Carol Lombard season.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. So I think that's us. I think we're going to keep on listening forever.
Yes,
and I think
buy everything.
Taking up so much of your time already. So thank you for listening, and I hope we've recommended a lot of films to you. And remember again, if you spend too much money, it's Ronan's fault. Just remember that.
I'm willing to take that hit.
Thanks a lot, Chris, for coming along again.
Much.
Not a problem. Hopefully it sounds a little bit different from the last time. But, let's not say better. Let's say different.
Yes.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. We'll find out soon enough. When I send you a groveling email saying, it went all wrong again.
I have to do the whole thing. Do you remember everything you said?
Yeah. Right. So thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Bye, thanks.